An arrogant cop thought he had absolute power on the sun-drenched streets of Malibu. He was wrong. The woman he chose to choke was not just any citizen, she was the wife of an Aikido grandmaster. The morning sun cast long, gentle shadows across the manicured grounds of the estate nestled high in the Malibu hills. Saltwater mist, carried on a soft Pacific breeze, mingled with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Inside the shoji-screened walls of a private dojo, Steven Seagal sat in perfect seiza, eyes closed, his breathing as slow and rhythmic as the distant tide. The world knew him as an action star, a titan of the silver screen. But here, in his sanctuary, he was simply a man in pursuit of balance. The polished oak floor beneath him was cool, the air still. For an hour, the only movement was the slow rise and fall of his chest, a study in controlled energy. His meditation concluded. He rose with a fluidity that defied his powerful frame, taking up a smooth, heavy bakken, a wooden training sword. He moved through a series of sub-yuri, practice swings, each cut slicing the silent air with a soft whoosh. It wasn't a workout, it was a conversation with space, a reaffirmation of form and intent. A soft chime from a small brass bell near the entrance broke his concentration. He lowered the bakken and turned. His wife, Ilara, stood silhouetted in the doorway, a warm smile on her face. A former principal ballerina, she possessed a grace that complemented his grounded strength. "I'm heading to the market, my love," she said, her voice like gentle music. "We're out of those heirloom tomatoes you like. And I thought I'd pick up some fresh orchids." He walked over, his imposing presence softening as he neared her. He placed a hand on her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. "Be safe," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Always," she whispered back, kissing his cheek before turning to leave. He watched her go, her light summer dress flowing around her as she walked toward the garage, a picture of serene elegance. He returned to his practice, the familiar weight of the bakken in his hands, the world outside his dojo fading once more into a distant hum. But miles away, in the sterile, air-conditioned chill of a Ford Explorer patrol unit, the world was anything but serene. Officer Brent Hargrove gripped his steering wheel, knuckles white. The dregs of his lukewarm coffee tasted like ash in his mouth. He scrolled idly through his phone, a feat of curated perfection from the wealthy residents of the community he was paid to protect, a community he deeply resented. Yachts, private jets, $1,000 dinners. He saw their lives as soft, decadent, and undeserved. Hargrove had a chip on his shoulder the size of the Malibu coastline. A string of citizen complaints for excessive force and verbal abuse decorated his file, each one quietly buried by a network of precinct buddies and a system that protected its own. He saw himself as a warrior holding the line against chaos, but his aggression was a poison, aimed most often at those whose skin was darker than his, whose presence in his territory felt like an affront. He was bored. He was irritated. And he was itching for a target to validate the coiled anger in his gut. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and started his cruiser, pulling out onto the Pacific Coast Highway. His eyes scanned the sidewalks, not for trouble, but for opportunity. And then he saw it. A woman stepping out of the high-end organic market, Eruhan. She was confident, elegant, black. Ilara Tyson. He didn't know who she was. He didn't care. All he saw was someone who, in his twisted worldview, didn't belong. In that single, venomous moment, he made a decision. He flicked on his lights, not the siren, just the silent, intimidating strobes, and pulled his SUV directly into her path. Ilara blinked, momentarily blinded by the rhythmic flash of red and blue lights against the bright California sun. She shielded her eyes, clutching her canvas tote bag filled with groceries. The massive black and white SUV blocked the crosswalk, its engine a low, menacing thrum. A uniformed officer emerged, his movements stiff and deliberate. He was tall, with a thick neck and a face set in a permanent scowl. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop right there," Officer Hargrove said, his voice artificially loud, designed to command and intimidate. Elara's brow furrowed in confusion. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "That's what I'm here to find out," Hargrove sneered, his eyes flicking from her face down to the tote bag. "We've had reports of shoplifting in the area. Let's see what you've got in the bag." A prickle of indignation ran down Elara's spine. She had spent a small fortune in that market, a place she'd shopped at for years. Shoplifting? "Officer, I can assure you, everything in this bag has been paid for. My receipt is right here." She began to reach into her purse, but Hargrove took a sharp step forward. "I didn't ask for a receipt. I said, show me what's in the bag. Now." The demand hung in the air, thick with unearned authority. A few passers-by began to slow their pace, sensing the shift in atmosphere. A mother holding her child's hand pulled him a little closer, creating distance. A teenager on a skateboard, who had been filming a trick video, instinctively lowered his phone, his bravado vanishing. Elara's posture, honed by years of ballet, remained impeccable. She would not be cowed. "I don't consent to a search, officer. You have no probable cause to." "Probable cause?" He let out a short, derisive laugh. "My probable cause is you fit the description." "The description of what, exactly?" she challenged, her voice dangerously quiet. "A woman buying groceries." That was it. The challenge to his authority was the only excuse he needed. Before she could react, he lunged forward and snatched the heavy canvas bag from her shoulder. With a grunt of contemptuous effort, he inverted it, dumping its entire contents onto the gritty sidewalk. A vibrant cascade of color and life spilled onto the concrete. A carton of organic eggs cracked, yellow yolks bleeding into the dirt. Heirloom tomatoes burst on impact, their seeds scattering. A bunch of fresh mint and a baguette rolled into the gutter. A beautiful, potted orchid, the one she had picked out for Steven, tumbled out, its delicate purple petals crushed under the weight of a falling avocado. Elara gasped, a sound of pure shock and violation. "What is wrong with you?" "Just doing my job," Hargrove sneered, kicking a bruised apple aside with the toe of his boot. He took another step toward her, his personal space invasion complete. "Now, let's make sure you're not hiding anything else." He reached for her arm. Instinct, sharp and immediate, took over. "Don't you touch me," she snapped, pulling back, her eyes flashing with fire. His face twisted into a mask of rage. It was the physical defiance he'd been waiting for. Resisting arrest, he barked, the words a pre-written script for the violence he was about to unleash. He shoved her backward with shocking force. Her back slammed against the cold, stucco wall of the market. The air rushed from her lungs. Before she could scream, before she could even process the assault, his thick, meaty hand wrapped around her throat. Pressure. Immediate and crushing. Her airway constricted. Black spots danced at the edge of her vision. She clawed at his wrist, her nails scraping against his skin and watchband, but his grip was like iron. The sounds of the street, the traffic, the distant chatter, faded into a muffled roar, replaced by the frantic, desperate pounding of her own heart. She was being choked, in broad daylight, in the middle of Malibu, and the world just watched. The teenager with the skateboard had his phone up now, his hands trembling so badly the image was likely a blur. The store manager peeked out the front door, his face pale with fear, before retreating back into the safety of his shop. No one moved. No one spoke. Fear was a paralytic, and Officer Hargrove was its administrator. Back in the hills, the small brass bell chimed again. Steven looked up from his training, expecting to see Elara returning with a smile. Instead, it was his neighbor, a retired music producer named Frank, his face ashen, his phone pressed to his ear. "Steven!" Frank yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "It's Elara. Turn on the news, no, just get down to Eruhan. Now." "A cop, my God, Steven, he's hurting her." A cold, preternatural stillness descended upon Steven Seagal. The world didn't speed up, it slowed down. Every sound sharpened, every color brightened. The low hum of anger that lived deep within him, the one he spent a lifetime controlling through discipline and meditation, didn't explode. It crystallized. It became a single point of cold, clear, diamond-hard focus. He didn't run. He moved. He placed the Bakken carefully on its rack, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. He strode through the house, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. He grabbed the keys to his black Mercedes G-Wagon, a vehicle built like a vault, and was out the door in seconds. The engine roared to life, a guttural snarl that echoed off the canyon walls. The drive down was not a frenzy of swerving tires and panicked acceleration. It was a display of absolute control, each turn navigated with geometric precision, each straightaway devoured at maximum, focused speed. He was not a husband racing to his wife's rescue. He was a weapon system being deployed. He screeched to a halt 50 feet from the scene. The flashing lights, the small crowd of frozen onlookers, the groceries scattered like refuse on the ground. And at the center of it all, the unthinkable. His Ilara. Pinned against the wall, her face a mask of terror and oxygen-deprived desperation, her beautiful, strong hands weakly clawing at the arm of the uniformed monster who was extinguishing her life. Steven exited the G-Wagon. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with a soft, final click. The crowd, which had been murmuring in fear, fell utterly silent. A collective gasp rippled through them as they recognized the immense figure now moving toward them. It was him. Hargrove, drunk on his own power, heard the shift in the atmosphere. He glanced over his shoulder, his grip on Ilara's throat momentarily loosening. He saw a massive figure in a simple black shirt and jeans, closing the distance with an unnatural, gliding gait. "Get back. This is police." His words were cut short. Steven didn't charge. He flowed. As Hargrove turned to confront the new threat, he exposed his right arm, the one choking Ilara. In a motion too fast to properly track, Steven's left hand enveloped Hargrove's wrist while his right hand cupped the elbow. It wasn't a punch. It was a lock. A devastatingly simple kotegaeshi, a wrist outward turn. Hargrove's body was no longer his own. An agony he had never imagined shot up his arm, a fire that lit up every nerve from his wrist to his shoulder. He was forced to follow the motion, his own momentum and weight becoming the engine of his destruction. Steven turned, flowing with the movement, and Hargrove was helplessly propelled forward, his body twisting in a grotesque pirouette. He was thrown, not pushed, flying sideways like a discarded toy. The crescendo was the sickening crunch of bone and metal as Officer Hargrove's body slammed onto the hood of his own patrol car. The steel dented visibly under the impact. He slid off, landing in a heap on the asphalt, moaning, his arm bent at an angle it was never meant to take. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. Steven was already at Ilara's side as she slumped to the ground, coughing, greedily sucking air into her lungs. He knelt, his large frame a protective shield around her. "Ilara. Baby, look at me. Are you okay?" he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, her hand going to her throat where angry red marks were already forming. I'm okay," she rasped. Steven rose to his full height. He turned his gaze to the groaning, pathetic figure of Officer Hargrove. The cold focus was back in his eyes. It was a look that promised a world of pain. "You put your hands on my wife." It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. The teenager who had been filming, his hands now steady, had captured everything. From the moment Seagal's G-Wagon arrived to the final, sickening thud of Hargrove's body on the cruiser, his phone's camera had been an unflinching witness. He hit stop, fumbled with the screen for a moment, and uploaded the 1-minute clip to TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Twitter with a simple, explosive caption, "Steven Seagal destroys Malibu cop attacking his wife." It was a digital match dropped into a tanker of gasoline. Within 10 minutes, the video had 100,000 views. Within 30, it was in the millions. The algorithm, sensing a viral supernova, pushed it to every corner of the internet. Hashtag Seagal Justice, hashtag Malibu Takedown, and hashtag Aikido Not Abuse began trending worldwide. News outlets, from TMZ to CNN, ripped the video and began broadcasting it on a loop, their anchors struggling to narrate the shocking, brutal efficiency of the takedown. At the Malibu/Lost Hills Sheriff Station, which handled LAPD overflow for the area, chaos reigned. The dispatch radio, which Hargrove had left open in his car, had broadcast every sound, Hilara's gasp, his own grunt, and finally, the horrifying crunch of his own body hitting his vehicle. Phones rang off the hook. Captain Eva Rostova, a woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and a reputation for tolerating zero nonsense, slammed her office door shut. "What in the hell is going on?" she roared at her lieutenant. "It's Hargrove, Captain," the man stammered, holding up his phone to show her the viral clip. He assaulted a woman. It turns out she's Steven Seagal's wife." Rostova's face, already stern, hardened into granite. She watched the clip once, her sharp eyes missing nothing: Hargrove's aggression, Hilara's dignified defiance, the illegal chokehold, and Seagal's terrifyingly precise intervention. "Get me his body cam footage. Now," she commanded. The lieutenant paled. "He wasn't wearing it, Captain. He logged it as malfunctioning at the start of his shift." Again. "Of course, he did," she spat, the words dripping with acid. "That man is a lawsuit in a uniform. Get internal affairs on the line. Get the sheriff on the line. And get an ambulance to that scene before Seagal decides to readjust his other arm. Our city is about to be on fire." Back at the estate, the world was on fire, but inside, an enforced quiet held sway. Steven had guided Hilara inside, past the arriving paramedics and the first wave of news vans. He gently cleaned the abrasions on her neck with a soft cloth and applied a soothing balm. He worked in silence, his touch tender, his focus absolute. The rage was still there, a simmering magma deep beneath the surface, but all of his energy was directed at her, at making her feel safe again. Hilara sat on a plush sofa, a cashmere blanket draped over her shoulders, her breathing finally steady. She watched her husband, this man of immense power and discipline, and saw the tremor in his hands as he tended to her. It wasn't a tremor of fear or weakness, but of barely contained force. "He didn't know who I was, Steven," she whispered. He paused, meeting her eyes. His own were dark with a pain that mirrored hers. "He didn't have to know who you were, Hilara," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "He just had to know you were a human being." And that was too much for him. His phone, lying on a nearby table, buzzed incessantly. A relentless stream of notifications, texts from friends, calls from his agent, his publicist. He ignored them all. The world could wait. But then, one message glowed on the screen that made him pause. It was from an old acquaintance, a woman he respected. Congresswoman Isabella Vance. The message was short: "Steven, I just saw the video. The whole world is watching. We can make this mean something. Call me." For 2 days, the Seagal estate was a fortress against the storm raging outside. News helicopters hovered at the edge of their airspace, and paparazzi with long lenses camped out on the public road below. Inside, there was only quiet healing. Steven cancelled all his appointments, spending his time with Hilara, walking through their gardens, or simply sitting in shared silence. But the silence couldn't hold back the tide. The video had transcended virality, it had become a cultural moment. It was debated on talk shows, analyzed by martial arts experts, and dissected by legal scholars. It sparked furious arguments about police brutality, racial bias, and vigilantism. For many, Steven Seagal wasn't a vigilante, he was a vessel for a justice they felt was long overdue. On the third day, Hilara, her bruises on her neck now a faint, yellowish shadow, placed her hand on his. The physical marks were fading, but her inner resolve had solidified into steel. "Isabella Vance called again," she said softly. "She's right, Steven." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "This is our private pain, Elara. Not a political spectacle." "It stopped being private the moment his hands were on my throat," she replied, her voice unwavering. "How many women, how many people, has he done this to? The ones who don't have you to show up. The ones whose videos get 100 views and are then forgotten." She took a deep breath. "You have a voice they are forced to listen to right now. I want you to use it. Not for revenge. For them." He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had refused to be extinguished when she was pinned against that wall. It was the strength he had first fallen in love with. He nodded slowly. "Okay. For them." The press conference was arranged on the steps of Los Angeles City Hall. It was an unprecedented event. Standing beside Steven Seagal were Congresswoman Vance, a formidable figure with a sharp suit and an even sharper mind, and, in a move that stunned many, LAPD Captain Eva Rostova. A crowd of thousands had gathered, a sea of faces, black, white, brown, all looking up with a shared sense of anticipation. They carried signs, "Control, not cruelty, the Elara Act now," and one, simply, a picture of Seagal with the words, "A master's lesson." When Steven stepped up to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. He was not the charismatic action hero from the movies. He was somber, grounded, his presence immense. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze seeming to meet every single person's. He began to speak, his voice calm, deep, and devoid of theatrics. "You all saw a video," he started. "You saw a fight. A man was put on the ground. Some of you may have cheered. But I am not here to talk about fighting. True martial arts, true mastery, is not about violence. It is about the absolute control of violence. It is about protecting life." He paused, letting the words settle. "What you saw in that video was not a display of strength from me. It was a display of catastrophic weakness from a man in a position of power. He did not choke my wife because he was strong. He choked her because he was weak. Because his ego was fragile. Because his self-control was non-existent. He abandoned his training, his duty, and his humanity for a moment of pathetic dominance." Another pause. He looked toward Captain Rostova, then back to the crowd. "The power vested in law enforcement is immense. It must be met with an even greater level of inner discipline. When that discipline fails, when control is lost, the badge stops being a symbol of protection and becomes a weapon of oppression. That officer did not fail because he encountered a strong opponent. He failed the moment he decided respect was optional." His voice grew softer, yet more intense. "I was there because of luck. But justice should not depend on luck. It should not depend on who your husband is. It must be the foundation of the system itself. We are here today to demand that foundation be rebuilt. With accountability. With transparency. And with a renewed commitment to the principle that the purpose of all power is to protect, never to violate." He stepped back from the microphone. The crowd was silent for a beat, processing the weight of his words. Then, an eruption of applause, not wild and chaotic, but deep, sustained, and resonant. It was the sound of a message being truly heard. The impact of Seagal's speech was immediate and seismic. It shifted the narrative from a simple celebrity brawl to a profound public discourse on the philosophy of power. Within a week, the consequences for Officer Brent Hargrove were swift and final. He was officially terminated from the Los Angeles Police Department. The district attorney's office, under immense public pressure, announced it was pressing felony assault charges. And the Department of Justice launched a full-scale federal investigation into the pattern of excessive force complaints within his former precinct. Congresswoman Vance, seizing the momentum, formally introduced a new piece of legislation to Congress, the Elara Act. Named for the woman whose ordeal had sparked a movement, the bill proposed mandatory, always-on body cameras with no officer deactivation, the creation of civilian-led oversight panels with real disciplinary power, and a fast-tracked, federally monitored system for reviewing citizen complaints. In a sterile room at a county hospital, Brent Hargrove stared at the cracked ceiling tile above his bed. His jaw was wired shut, a dull, constant ache, a reminder of his folly. His right arm was in a heavy cast, his ribs tightly bound. The physical pain was nothing compared to the torment of his new reality. A small television mounted on the wall played the news on a loop. He saw the clip of his assault, followed by Seagal's speech, over and over again. He saw his own sneering face, a monument to his arrogance. He wasn't just fired, he was a pariah. A meme. A cautionary tale. The warrior had been dismantled, not by brute force, but by a quiet, precise technique that had broken his body and a calm, powerful speech that had shattered his legacy. The silence in his room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the machines that kept him comfortable while his life fell apart. A month later, on the corner in Malibu where it all began, a new piece of art appeared on the wall of the Eruhan market. A local artist had painted a stunning mural. On one side, it depicted Alara, not as a victim, but standing tall, her head held high, her expression one of unbreakable dignity. Beside her stood Steven, his hands not raised in a fighting stance, but held loosely at his sides, his gaze watchful and protective. The fight was no longer with fists, it was with truth and resolve. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Steven and Alara came to see it. They stood before the mural, hand in hand. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You're beautiful," he responded, his voice soft. He looked from the mural to her face. "The foundation is official. The first checks from the Alara Fund go out next week. Legal support for women who have nowhere else to turn." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the two of them a silent, powerful silhouette against the fading light. The scars had faded, but the purpose remained. The incident on that sunny afternoon sparked a firestorm, but it also illuminated a path forward. It showed that sometimes, it takes a moment of shocking clarity to force a necessary change. The conversation about accountability is far from over, and every voice matters. What are your thoughts on where the line is between justified defense and vigilantism? Let us know in the comments below. We ask that you please be respectful in your discussion. This is a space for conversation, not conflict. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that makes you think. Thank you for watching.